Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on this Wednesday evening. Tonight, our panel discussion once again in conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. We welcome you, our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. Now, tonight's discussion promises to be quite an interesting one because it is a much talked about subject. Are we talking about South African companies and targeting for hiring migrant workers? And this is across all sectors of the economy, whether we're talking about manufacturing, agriculture, logistics, and even small businesses as well. And we've seen these crackdowns and enforcement taking place, joint operations, the South African Police Service, Department of Home Affairs, the Department of Employment and Labor, and they are conducting what we know as aggressive compliance blitzes at workplaces that are suspected of utilizing undocumented labor. And these are accompanied by stiff penalties, and we see authorities are pushing for these penalties and fines are being issued. The key issue here is to try and unpack what is happening. And this is a question that we are asking. Are these companies under fire for hiring migrants, or is this about jobs? Is this about xenophobia? Now, we have assembled quite an interesting panel this evening. We've got Vuyolwethu Zungula, who is a member of parliament, portfolio committee on employment and labor, Andile Nyembezi, casual worker advice office representative. And we also have got an attorney with us, Ashraf, Essop, immigration law attorney. Vuyo, Andile, Ashraf, to all of you, we welcome you to the show and good evening to you.
Good evening and thank you.
Good evening.
Vuyo, I'd like to actually begin with you because you're obviously right in the thick of things as a member of parliament serving on the portfolio committee. And of late, obviously, we've seen these blitzes taking place right across the entire country. And we've had a number of listeners and viewers that have actually asked us to actually cover this topic and try to make sense of what is happening. Just, we are looking at it as a member of parliament and serving on a portfolio committee. Just what is the thinking, what is the thought process from a government perspective? Vuyo, can you hear me? I think we are having a bit of a problem as far as Vuyo is concerned. We're going to try and see if we can't get hold of Vuyo at this point in time. Ashraf, let's just continue. And obviously, we want to delve into some of the legal issues and the legalities, being an immigration attorney yourself as well. But I think just by way of introduction, I'm sure you are aware and you are keeping a close eye on some of these developments that are taking place and the crackdowns that are being jointly done with the police, with Home Affairs, and also Labor Department.
Obviously, that has been in the news in the last few days. And the run up to this was the deadline given being the 30th of June for undocumented migrants to leave. Now, on that topic alone, it is doubtful that the undocumented migrants had left due to the threat of legal prosecution. They left on the basis, I believe, of personal safety. And now we have the situation that there are organizations or people and members of government that are paying employers a visit. This is not something new. The Immigration Act was amended way back in 2014. So these provisions were there regarding the employment, etc., of foreign nationals. But there was a very soft approach towards that. What we're witnessing now is a concerted effort by government officials, immigration officials, labor unions, and even members of the public that have approached businesses and demanded to be involved in who they've hired, and in terms of labor law, whether that was whether those labor laws were being respected. So, in terms of the Immigration Act, a immigration officer may, without a warrant, arrest or cause an illegal foreigner to be arrested, detained, and deported. It does not make provision, as far as I can interpret the legislation, for them to enter the employer's premises for those purposes. Now, usually, if a government institution is about to take action, excluding the labor law, which I'm not an expert in, but it's usual that you would provide notice to the entity that you're going to be engaged with. This is in keeping with the precepts of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. So you ideally, in terms of observing procedural safeguards, ought to be engaging with the entity, advising them about the action you will take, and advising them that they are entitled to make representations, etc. But given the fact that there's now a demand and a push for employing locals, and also the demand and the push to properly observe the provisions of the Immigration Act, this seems somehow to have lost the objectives to act procedurally fair in these instances. Now, also accept that these are early days and there's a lot of learning going on. But one thing is clear is that these, let's say, efforts have resulted in several employers being charged and given a choice to stand trial or pay an admission of guilt to the tune of 10,000 per infringement. We've read in the press recently about so many employers being faced with this. But in the past, this has already happened for the last 12 months or so, where employers were visited and their staff were audited. And basically, if there was an infringement, the employer was fined and the illegal immigrant removed by the Department of Home Affairs, as well as South African Police. So it's interesting now that we're seeing a heightened number of these activities taking place, which has brought results for both sides. For employers, they're now aware of what their responsibilities are. And one of the responsibilities that the employer has to abide by is to make good faith efforts to determine the permit and identity of the employee. This is easier said than done. The Department of Home Affairs system that allows you to check is inoperational. Some employers have gone to the police and asked for a police clearance, thinking that that is sufficient. Others are in a total sense of ignorance about whether a refugee, for example, is allowed to work and study, and there have been a number of different opinions in this in the public space. But certainly the Refugees Act allows for that. I mean, there's a Constitutional Court decision in Ahmed versus the Minister, which basically reinstated the Dimona decision of 10 years ago that brought about this ruling that refugees are allowed to work and study and indeed establish a business. So you can see what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of ignorance about the true provisions of the Immigrations Act. Would you like me to stop there?
Yes, in fact, I've just made a few notes and there are just so many further questions that we will be raising, Ashraf. And I see Vuyo has joined us. Vuyo, good evening to you once again and welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Vuyo, you've heard obviously Ashraf, and we just basically introduced the discussion. And I'm just looking at it from a government's perspective and from someone like yourself, who is a member of parliament, in terms of how government is looking at what we are seeing, the latest developments in terms of these joint crackdowns of employers that are taking place.
Evening to yourself and to the co-panelist. I think let me start by making reference to what the failure is. The failure is in the side of government in the context that you only had 832 immigration officers. Those were the law enforcement officers that are having the capacity and mandate to ascertain whether a person is in the country legally, whether their condition of stay, whether the permit they have, or the status in which they are in the country allows them to work, etc. And also to employers, whether those employers are in violation of their respective crimes. So what we've seen across the years is a failure of government to enforce that particular law, the immigration law, in relation to how foreign nationals can get employed, and can work, can basically run businesses in our country. Now, the failures of the government has led to citizens being informed what the law says to try and have, I want to call it illegal immigration activism. Whilst you are going to have activism for various issues, whether it's gender-based violence, it's issues concerning water or service delivery, you now have a phenomenon of illegal immigration activism, whereby, amongst others, people protest, they petition parliament, they put pressure to the executive, which has now translated into the government actually doing something. Now, I think that is where now the government is acting on the premise of being put under pressure. The government is acting wanting to solve a problem that they've not been able to deal with or look at for over 20 years, because the issues pertaining to immigration, illegal immigration, are not new. You'll recall in 2008, when there was the instability in our country as a result of these issues. It is something that happened over 20 years ago, close to 20 years ago. However, even back then, the government did not do anything tangible to solve the problem. Even now, the government is acting because there's pressure. So what then is the responsibility on citizens. And what I mean by citizens, I also include companies, that companies need to learn to abide by the laws of the country. Companies need to respect the labor laws, because we know what companies normally do. They prefer to employ migrants, not because they have a better work ethic or more skill than South Africans, primarily because they can be better exploited. Hence, you find that when you were watching, when the Malawian citizens were going back to their country, when the TV or media was interviewing those migrants, they were saying that they could not have, they did not have their salaries, they did not have access to all sorts of benefits and privileges that are afforded to the workers in the normal sense of things. So, which goes to show that the crisis that we have, on one side, it is a government that fails to manage the issues of migration. On the other side, it is companies who then prefer to employ migrants for exploitation purposes. And in turn, the South African citizens are sidelined. And that is the sole reason why there is this social tension. So to solve the social tensions that we have, it is not going to be solved by labeling. You can label South Africans either say they're xenophobic, Afrophobic, all people want, but it's not going to solve the problem. was going to solve the problem. It is actually government having a clear, tangible plan to solve the problem. Companies as well, learning to abide by the laws of the country, respecting the laws of the country, paying South Africans and paying them what they are worth. That is the way in which the crisis can be averted.
Well, thank you for that, Vuyo. And let's bring Andile into the discussion. Andile, you've heard what Ashraf had to say, you've heard what Vuyo had to say as well. And what Vuyo is talking about, a 20-year problem. And Ashraf is saying there is legislation in place now for someone like yourself, casual workers advice office representative. Just, what are your observations? What are you seeing? And I'm sure you have interacted with many migrants who are in South Africa, whether they are documented or undocumented.
Yes, good evening and good evening to the panelists. Yes, what you see, for me, what I think is important in the way that what we are experiencing on the ground and the kinds of calls that are being made, this is probably something that has been brewing in relation to the unemployment within the country, which of course, and in terms of the bubble bursting, probably if you can use that term, and this bubble burst on a call which I think is very regressive in our lives and I think in our democracy in South Africa. Because in terms of what we had been confronted with, and if we take from our experience, when we have identified the different nationalities that have been attacked, it has been mainly Malawians, and mainly some of them have been on the farms. So I think it's not just an issue of, it seems like what has been happening, which no one wants to mention, is probably there's been a lot of sort of human trafficking. And that's what our experience tells us, because if you take one farm that dismisses about 90 people, and recently, if you take in Witbank, criminality has also creeped into the process where the same different nationalities are made to even get onto the bus, because when they are dismissed by these employers who do not give them anything, neither comply with the laws, there are then other extortioners that comes into the picture, who claims to be community leaders, who then says, in order for you to get onto that bus to get home, you have to pay so much. Now, that is the reality that we are facing. And even in some of the instances where you would find around this call that is made by organizations like March and March, around this call, you would find that the role, which is very passive, that the police play, because, as I said, in our view, this call that is being made, which some parties in parliament are participants in perpetuating this, you would find that very little is done in order for that to be prevented. Instead, it's been fueled. If I can make an example, some of the police in some of the areas, in particular from where we are based in Germany, in those areas, I mean, you had police who were walking in the streets, and they just came across a group of Lesotho citizens who apparently did not have their papers. All they had to do in order for them to arrest them, to is to pay them 500 rand. And that was right in front of us. You had a situation where employers calls upon the police to say that I have got migrant workers who are working in my business, but they've been working for 15 to 8 years. So it's not that they are discovering now, but I mean, they have been part of this illegal conduct or breaching the laws in employing some people. So for us, the experience is quite different. And we are saying is that the passiveness and the corruption that occurs, whether it is at border points or it is with the police, is quite high. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Thank you for that, Andile. And Ashraf, just to bring you back into the discussion, and Andile speaks of selective targeting, and just from a legal perspective, you mentioned earlier on, you spoke about ignorance, and just to understand how clear, Ashraf, is the law in terms of who can work, who can't work, and how easy is it for ordinary people, lay people, to actually interpret what the law really says?
So I think the Immigrations Act and Refugees Act is ready and easily interpreted. I think what has happened is that many people dropped the ball. One of them, as Vuyo has indicated, is the government, the Department of Home Affairs specifically. Now, some of the members of the public were often misled by so-called agents. They are illegal immigration agents that worked within syndicates, with syndicates or alone, with the cooperation of departmental officials who were susceptible to bribes, who gave out these documents that appeared to be normal and legal, which looked genuine on the face of it. Now, in fact, you had, as an employer, as I've mentioned, the duty to go and investigate if this permit was true or not. But because of the government officials, right now, even if you go to an inspectorate, it's very difficult to get their cooperation to verify a permit. The second thing is the online portal has collapsed. But I fear that sometimes we don't always take into account that it's not only the employer. There are court cases that put the employer in a very difficult position. Let me cite one example. In the matter of Discovery versus CCMA, Discovery found an employee with a fraudulent work visa. It tried to discipline him and found that there was a infringement and dismissed him. That employee went to the CCMA and actually won, because the CCMA held that there are two sides of this coin. There is the immigration, let's say, illegal permit, and there is the rights vouchsafed in the Labor Relations Act. It found that there was no breach of the Labor Relations Act, which narrowed down the basis of dismissal. So here you have a very difficult situation where an employer knows an employee doesn't have the necessary permit, but cannot fire him on the basis of the permit because there is no LRA, Labor Relations Act, infringement. In terms of protection of foreign workers, legal and illegal, our courts have held that even illegal immigrants that are injured in motor vehicle collisions for negligence are entitled to a payout from the RAF road accident fund. I think that's set in the region of about a billion rand. Recently, court interpreters were apparently paid in the region of about 560 million for interpretation purposes. Now, what part of that covered foreign interpreters is unknown, but certainly there have now been a lot more languages: French, Arabic, Swahili, I mean, you name it. And part of the legal process is that you must understand the process in the language that you prefer. Lastly, in the last week or so, there's been news that foreign students have cost the Department of Education in excess of 1.1 billion. Now, remember, the erstwhile minister said for people writing matric, etc., forget about your permit, get on with the education. So you can see that there's been multiple levels of failure, including what Andile has mentioned, the corruption, both in DHA and SEPs, which continues up to this day. In many areas, this is a cash cow. Both parties know there's an infringement, but money changes hands and the law doesn't, operate at that point. So I'm saying, apart from the notion that employers are exploiting foreign workers, I'm saying those foreign workers were protected by the law. It can't be the only narrative that we lay at the door of the employer. This is not to condone what they're doing. In fact, landlords have a duty to keep a record of the people that are foreign and that they are housing. So again, the net is quite wide. And then there's this catch-all clause of aiding and abetting. You could be transporting illegal immigrants on your bus or your minibus taxi. That vehicle can be impounded as part of the crime of transporting illegal workers. The focus is back on the Immigrations Act and its provisions. There is no education or reasonable access portals for ordinary people that are employers that are engaging with foreign workers to verify their identity, status, and permit. And I think that needs to be attended to urgently.
Yes, Ashraf. In fact, again, there's just so much that one can actually take away from what you've just said. And perhaps, Buyo, you'd like to comment on some of these issues that Ashraf has raised. Because I think what is clear is, ignorance is one issue, but also in terms of, looking at procedural fairness that Ashraf alluded to right at the beginning, promotion of administrative justice as well. And also at the same time, he spoke about protection of both legal and illegal migrants. Now, in terms of conduct, in terms of behavior, from what we are seeing with the crackdowns that are taking place jointly, whether it's by SEPS, Home Affairs, the Department of Labor as well, is there a clear policy on the government as far as conduct of its officials are concerned?
The crisis that we face is basically a crisis of government inaction. Government inaction and the lack of capacity from the side of government to actually enforce what is currently in the law. That speaks to also the questions of political will, whether there is political will, is the cross coordination between departments to ensure that what is in the law is actually enforced. I'll make an example about the case of the former Miss South Africa contestant who was declared undesirable by Home Affairs, but she went to Nigeria, comes back illegally, comes back to South Africa and fights South Africa Home Affairs from within the country. And that is because the system could not be able to detect that this person was declared undesirable, because it should happen that if a person is declared undesirable, whether you try enter the country from Cape Town International Airport or from Maseru border post or anywhere, the system must speak to each other and the system must be able to detect. And I want to agree with the sentiment that the courts or the government as well, in terms of the laws, has been somewhat enabling what is currently happening. For instance, the question of a person comes into the country illegally, they commit a crime, however, they are granted bail. Even though they are granted bail, the government does not even have a tangible proof where the person will stay in terms of their home address. Whereas for South African citizens, for them to actually be granted bail, one of the strict conditions is that there must be a place where a person is determined to be the address, so the police is able to follow up. So I think at a broader level is that we've got a country that is built on the 1994 political settlement in which the country's leadership back then wanted then to enact laws that will seem to be the opposite of the cruel, inhumane apartheid government. Now, the issue with being so optimistic is that you then allow room for criminal elements to use your laws against you. Hence, you find that the people that are illegal in the country commit crimes. They act against the government precisely because of the nature of the laws that we have in the country. I think Ashraf spoke about in detail whether it is in the question of students, the question of grants, the question of foreigners, even if they're illegal in the country, being able to access the road accident fund. Yet, when South Africans go to other countries, the medical aid and the insurance, it is one of the requirements that they need to have. So, at a broader policy level or legislative level, that is what I think is the premise of the problems that we have. However, we do want to also say, but had we had a government that is clear about solving the problem, they would have had a program or a drive to amend the laws that are not speaking to dealing with the problem. For example, the question of refugees. Currently, the country allows refugees from anywhere in the world. And you find that the principles of the United Nations is that the first safe country principle, it is what is generally accepted worldwide. However, many people skip many countries, come settle in South Africa precisely because, firstly, we don't have refugee camps. So people can live within communities, be entitled to jobs, be entitled to run businesses. That then is a loophole. However, the government does not address that loophole. So, in conclusion, I think the issues, yes, political will, yes, corruption, yes, employers, but at a broader societal scale, it is the issue of a government that has been lax when it comes to identifying what the problem is at a policy legislative level and then amending laws to correct the problem.
Thank you for that view, Vuyo. Andile, I think, my question to Vuyo obviously was surrounding also administrative justice and also in terms of, procedure, how fair, and I'm sure, you've seen the situation on the ground. And perhaps you could all actually share with us, because, you speak about selective targeting as well, where specific groups of migrants have been targeted as well. And just looking at it from a procedure perspective, and also in terms of, how fair is justice being meted out to them. If you could unmute your mic, please, Andile.
Yeah, I don't know how much how much time is there left before we close.
Now we've got another 25 minutes or so. So
Look, what I have not said, I don't think is the issue of selective targeting. What I'm saying, what this has exposed to us in terms of if you take the farms and you take even some of the manufacturing companies. What has become clear over time in terms of the sort of migrants who have been under this kind of pressure in groups of numbers that are around 90 upwards, has been mostly, as far as we're concerned at the moment, in terms of what is Malawians. And the question arose to us as to why, and most of them have been like on the farms. Now, on the basis of that, in trying to answer that question, what does this then suggest? Because it's clearly for us, it seems to be that there has been a lot that has been happening over time, which you can say at the moment, because at the moment, what is also happening, some of the, and I think I would recommend there's an important article to read by a ex-farmer who did an analysis of the impact of what this has been, because what is happening is that harvest season now, there's no harvesting that is happening. There is no people who are getting or who are like getting jobs of those migrants that have left. And that creates a huge problem for the farmers at the moment. You have a situation where, as I said, in mostly around the Malawian consulates and various areas, that some of the workers and the employees are now redirected back to the farms. And the worst of the worst is happening now is that they are not even paid for the work that they do in order to deal with this problem of harvesting. Now, it's not a targeting in terms of what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say is that what has accumulated since the 30th, which probably has happened before, shows us why this, in particular, nationality of Malawians are such of a high number in comparison to the other. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Andile. Ashraf, I think also, maybe if we can just focus a bit on in terms of process and procedure. And I just want to cite one or two examples just to reinforce what I'm trying to convey here is, we've seen instances where there have been crackdowns. We've seen instances where there have been raids. And we've seen even certain cases, for example, an employee who is a South African and not an owner of the business, and together with those that are considered as undocumented migrants being arrested and being fined. Now, again, when we speak about administrative justice, about fair procedure, and when you have officials, I mean, they would walk into a business, and this may be perhaps a manager or a supervisor and not the owner of the business, and they take him in and they force him to pay an admission of guilt fine as well, and just to test the legality of these type of actions, because these are common actions, these are common issues that are taking place. Ashraf?
Oh, sorry, was that directed to me?
Yes, it was, Ashraf. Yeah.
All right. So as I mentioned, right, there doesn't appear to be any guidance in any of the legislation as to who in the public this can be entrusted to. What it very clearly states is that inspectorate has that power and authority in terms of the Immigrations Act. Now, is there a warrant required? I've just mentioned that Section 32 of the Act says, with or without a warrant, a immigration officer may arrest a suspected illegal foreigner. But let's have a look at the court's treatment of such legislation. So you recall in a number of years ago in the Ulde decision, ULDE, the High Court and the Supreme Court had this to say, that even if the immigration officer suspects a person to be an illegal immigrant, he enjoys a discretion. And that discretion must inform the next step that he takes. However, they said to the immigration officer that there should be training by the Department of Home Affairs. There should be standard operational procedures. But what you should do is you should favor liberty. Now, in favorem libertatis. Now, you'll ask yourself, why are we favoring all these criminals and etc., etc.? Understand this. South Africa's 300 years of oppression and wealth was built on the backs of migrant workers. For time immemorial, people's labor has been exploited by one in one form or the other. Our vast agricultural and mining successes were due to the poor and cheap migrant labor that was imported for short-term purposes from our neighboring countries. They knew they had no rights, and that government in place at the time enforced those rights. Then you'd remember the Dom Pass, which there was a protest against, that why should I be asked to carry an identity that proves who I am? So that also had an impact on how governments dealt with this. Now we come to the present situation, and from 1994, it's true what Vuyo said, that there have been many liberties given to foreigners. But let's take the ZEP. Such was the crisis in Zimbabwe and the crush on the asylum-seeking process in South Africa, that a new way had to develop to ensure just and fair processes were in place, but at the same time catering for the needs of the applicants. And the ZEP was born. And now we know the ZEP is 14 years old, and some people are saying they're entitled to get permanent residence from that permit. Now, it was very clear from the inception that you will never qualify for permanent residence. In fact, the courts have shown this and given the ZEP the last lifeline until May 2027, in which they are supposed to be migrating out of the ZEP into a regular immigration visa. The same can be said of Angola and a short while for Lesotho. So all of these efforts were made to try and accommodate the people freely and fairly. With regard to procedural fairness, you know the HSF, Helen Suzman Foundation, was successful in taking the Department of Home Affairs to court regarding the blanket withdrawal of the ZEP. And the court said, but you did not observe the rules of PAJA, Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, because you failed to give notice of what you were going to do. You simply pulled out the rug. And look at what it's resulted in. Multiple rounds of legal challenges and ultimately the stalemate at present. So of all the millions of people that were here, 180,000 Zimbabweans were entitled to ZEP. Although the ZEP came to an end in December 2024, they are still present here under the lifeline given by the court until May 2027. So there you can see the importance of the observance of all of these rules, especially administrative justice. Now, why is all this important? Because our constitution is based on redressing the past and never repeating the history that we went through all these years, this awful history of apartheid. So, for example, apartheid determined that you were not a citizen. You're sleeping one night in South Africa, the next night you were a citizen of Venda. You can see how important citizenship is and how important it is to engage with the people with proper administrative justice. You had to give a person a hearing. You had to allow them to come and contest what you were saying. All of the laws were there to address the injustices of the past. Whether that law has been exploited or misinterpreted or taken advantage of, for example, in where some people are now insisting on permanent residence flowing from ZDP, is another debate. However, the present situation is being addressed. The white paper on immigration reform is looking at all of these events. For example, the white paper now envisages that an asylum seeker will be hosted at the refugee reception office close to a South African border and will not be able to enter the Republic to work and sojourn. With regard to citizenship, this long-term throughput pipeline of time-based temporary residence visas that allow you a pipeline into permanent residence, a pipeline into citizenship is being revised. I think the new look Immigrations Act is very, very clear. They only want the highest skills with the best possible financial contribution to the Republic. And then the Immigrations Act has tightened up completely. There's no longer general work visas. Everything is work visa based on points and critical skills. If you don't make it there, you're not getting a job. And then the Employment Equity Amendment Act will determine that you can't employ domestic workers, gardeners, and unskilled workers. And there's one more piece of legislation where employers will have to stick to a quota. So you can see that there is legislative interventions to try and address these things. Thank you.
Yes, Ashraf. Yes, there are legislative interventions and delay, but also I think looking at it from the government's perspective now, and we know that had it not been for the crisis that we see, had it not been for pressure that has been put to government, we would not have been seeing these actions. We wouldn't have seen these companies coming under fire, for hiring migrants who are considered as illegal or undocumented. But the key issue here is, again, who is holding the government responsible? Because we spoke about, is this about jobs? Is this about xenophobia? And the mere fact that you mentioned that, even by getting rid of the migrants, we are not going to be creating jobs. And yet we've seen promise after promise from the government. We've seen job summits where millions has actually been spent and promises of job creation that has never ever materialized. So on the one hand, you're taking action against the companies, but you haven't taken action against yourself. You have not been held accountable as a government. Andile? Your mic again, please.
Yes, no. Look, I think just to agree with Ashraf, I think the issue that I think is not as Ashraf, I think, has outlined is the very same experiences of pre-94 becoming reintroduced in a different form, perhaps, in the actions that one sees are taking place, as I said, as he said, the dumb pass of what we have gone past, and the kind of problems of how that past is beginning to reintroduce itself. The other issue, which I thought, and that's why it's important for me, it's very important as to how do you enter this issue, whether it should be entered on the issue of, whether they're legal or not illegal. To me, which is not the issue. It's more the issues of the social ills that the South African poor is experiencing, and how opportunistically, as I said, members and parties in government are actually perpetuating this narrative that I think brings us back to what we thought is a hurdle that we have gone over of Dompasses and being classified as foreigners in a country which we were born in. As Ashraf was saying, I mean, migrancy has been part of the history of this country. It's not a new thing. It's just that, and I think what one interestingly will be watching this kind of passive and participation of parties in parliament on this call and these actions that are taking place, whether what it will be like after November, because at the moment it seems like everyone is cautious, which as government now, in ensuring that they do not lose votes in the coming elections.
Yes,
Thank you.
Andile. Yes. Ashraf, I've just got a message that has come through. It's quite a lengthy message. So what I'm going to try and do is just basically summarize this in point form, and perhaps you can comment on this because it talks about the crisis of foreign nationals and migrants in South Africa, but also in terms of calling it an immediate humanitarian and governance response to the immigration crisis. Now, recognizing that there are legitimate concerns of South Africans regarding illegal immigration, unemployment, crime pressure on public services, and the like as well. But at the same time, saying equally, no failure of government can justify intimidation, extortion, assault, or any form of violence against vulnerable people. And talking further about South Africa cannot restore rule of law by abandoning it as well. And at the same time, talking about many migrants who have lived in South Africa for many years. And also, this is a concern, but also talking about calling on the government to declare a humanitarian documentation moratorium, for a period of time, and making reference to what is called the PI Act. We're saying that the PI Act in South Africa prevents unlawful evictions, sets legal procedures for removing unlawful occupiers, and balances property owner rights with housing rights.
That's a lot to try and digest in one bite.
I
Let
know.
me just make this
I'm
clear.
aware. I'm sorry for that. Yes.
Let me make this clear. The Immigrations Act speaks of interdepartmental cooperation. That is, again, something that should have been implemented. Whether it is border security, border management, or defense, which now patrols the borders, or humanitarian aid, or the rights of detained persons to minimum standards of healthcare, nutrition, and shelter. Those are for detained people. South Africa has got a huge housing crisis. There are laws that have been revised about illegal evictions. Lessors and landlords have been given more power. Obviously, we know that in these cases, there's a shortage of housing. Again, a tremendous failure on the part of the government to make RDP houses available properly. Now, when it comes to evictions, the traditional position was that you had to go to court and get a twofold process. That is now under scrutiny because it made it very difficult for lessors to act. Then there is rural evictions. I've heard of a case now from the head of Pro Bono, where a farmer had evicted a lot of people that lived on the land for 20 years, and he was trying to shoo them away. And the ultimate settlement was 400,000 per family to be given decent accommodation that they were used to. On the other hand, you also have a lot of people that opportunistically and in criminal syndicates operate to destroy the infrastructure and accommodation that is there. By this, I mean the inner city decay that we've seen that is now being reversed especially here in Johannesburg through various means, and rehabilitation, all of that holds promise of growing, a new respect for the law. Of course, when it comes to humanitarian crisis, South Africa boasts one of the most effective NGOs anywhere in the world, like Gift of the Givers. They're there at every disaster, whether it's a mine disaster or whatever, and they fill that gap between what the government is supposed to be doing and what ordinary civic society is doing. And obviously, that is built on the goodwill of people. Nobody gives for name and fame, they only give out of humanitarian concerns. And that is done without discrimination. But you can't see to every crisis in every part of South Africa. There is starvation in the remote areas, in the rural areas. I've been recently to the Karoo and I've witnessed the kind of discrimination there is. But 10,000 labor inspectors are now being deployed. They will find these discrepancies and they will deal with it. So I think we're onto a road to recovery, but we can't do everything at the same time. Of course, it is absolutely disgusting and really heartsore to see women and children staying in the cold, exposed to the elements, without help, food, shelter, basic human needs. But there also is a responsibility on the government of those nationals to step in and assist their nationals. South Africa is unique in that case. Our constitution protects you wherever you are. The constitutional case of Khumalo in 2009 said our government is obliged to dispatch diplomatic staff to come and see you, not necessarily to help you, to give you legal aid, but at least there's some contact. So I think that foreign governments also need to step up to the plate. Thank you.
Yes, Ashraf. And I see we've got about 3 minutes as well. So my final thoughts with you, Andile, is, we know that this is a huge problem. It's a massive problem. And putting a Band-Aid is not going to solve the problem. The key issue here is it does appear as if we are in a chaotic situation. And obviously the circumstances that we find ourselves in requires the situation to be managed in an orderly manner, in a humane manner, and making sure that there is a lawful resolution rather than a panic-driven response that we are witnessing right now. Your mic again, please, Andile.
You see, the problem can manifest itself in many ways. And as I said, since in the last 30 years, I think what is important is for government to have a relook at itself and its pursuance of this kind of neoliberal policies are not really resolving the kind of social ills that I think we're talking about now as South Africans. Hence, as I said, the spilling over of that to making the issue of the migrant workers as the problem is missing the point and is diverting our attention from this kind of neoliberal policies that the government is pursuing. It's been 30 years now, 30 years and more. And it seems not to be getting off that kind of course that it is pursuing. And the same happens with the GNU. It's pursuing the same policies because there was no difference between all of those in their own perspective of what is the need and what kind of policies are required in South Africa as we speak.
Yes, Andile. I see Ashraf obviously has left us as well, but we'd like to thank Ashraf, Essop, and yourself, Andile, and also Vuyo, who was with us earlier. Sadly, he had to leave us as well. But for now, we need to take leave of you as well. And once again, we do appreciate you taking time out with us here at Salam Media, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Fari.
Yes, well, that brings us to the end of part one of tonight's discussion, and I think we basically scratched the surface because it's just so much. And interestingly, I got this very lengthy WhatsApp message, and at some point in time, we'd like to have an interview as well. It's come through from Iqbal Kolia, and this is the organization called Musa MU. We have spoken to them in the past, and again, this is a statement or an urgent appeal that has gone through to the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Minister of Police, Justice, Social Development, and other relevant government departments in terms of calling for an immediate humanitarian and governance response to the immigration crisis. So we will try and get hold of Musa, because I think there's just so much that one can actually take away. And this is a major talking point in the country, and it is something that we will continue talking about, we will continue exploring as well. But for now, we're going to take leave of you for this particular segment. We still have got the next one coming up from 8 to 9 p.m. and our focus is going to be on Pakistan. And the question we are saying is Pakistan repeating in its own country what it has been accusing India of doing in Kashmir? We've got Salman Khan that will be coming up, and also we've got a professor, a doctor who is a regular at Salam Media as well, Professor Junaid Ahmed, who will be joining and unpacking this topic. And the question is about Pakistan condemning India's actions in Kashmir, but is it repeating them at home? We'll be back in a few minutes. Stay with us.